This is something that people have kind of uncovered online after some initial hints on the 19th century internet. I'm not the first to describe it, and I won't be the most scientific or well-presented, have you seen me? I'm just the most me-like. So I'm unable to mentally picture stuff, which is called being aphantastic. It basically means if you say that don't picture an elephant thing, I can actually not picture it. That's why it's called Aphantasia. And that's baffling to a lot of people. They don't get how it could happen. If you don't get how people could experience aphantasia, I'd like to ask you to simply try picturing it. Yeah, I'm saving on the visual effects budget on this video, because you can just make your own up, weirdo. So often, the humans say something metaphorically, or where the meaning isn't what the words say, and I spent a long time assuming that the idea of picturing something was similar, but they actually mean this one. Standard disclaimer time, I have a lot of alleged conditions that are defined by the lack of a presumed experience or orientation, and in most cases, the best way to explain what it is like goes, you know, mentally picturing stuff? Yeah, not that. Epistemologically, I argue that we shouldn't surrender to letting the most common experience take definition as the neutral, but the one closest to nothingness, and then explain up from there with the elements that are actually present. But until I win that argument, I guess I'll explain myself. This video is sponsored by lack. And it's only myself I can describe here. Maybe others with this same non-experience will find they have similar properties or non-properties. But there's probably a lot more ways to describe it too that I don't think of or that don't even describe me. The main effect is that I miss out on that rotate a cow meme. If I want to rotate a cow, I have to go find an actual cow. So I have to go across to a YouTube channel where all the videos are written and produced by a cow, and the cow's never there anyway. Here's the popular JPEG just for clarity, though maybe you were picturing it already. I think I'm almost always in 5 with very occasional momentary glimpses that might reach toward 3 but really don't last. Fragment of a second. I think my aphantasia maybe did have a starting point, and it might correlate with antidepressants or depression or almost hitting puberty somewhere in early adulthood. Those kind of blur together. Puberty is depressing, antidepressants are depressing, and you'll never guess what depression is. But I've tried a few months without antidepressants and got no increased sense of fantasia, and I'm always shaving off my pubes. The timing for me might line it up with other inabilities, not able to cry, so it's entirely possible it's some traumatic self-infliction. Like that was a trauma time. Whatever, still an experience. If you watch all of my experiential videos, you can assemble a diagnosis, but not offer any help. I do dream when asleep, and I'd say that has visual elements, though maybe not the most vivid. That's established. Sleepo dreams are a separate thing. I don't seem to daydream, and I think I could as a child. The closest thing to waking fantasia I experience is those real hazy moments of near sleep where you're still awake enough to be aware of stuff, but dozing into the dreamscape. But even that's a very rare experience. I think during that time I can kind of control some visuals a bit, like a hue slider, which is probably a bit of what Fantasia is just abstracted to those moments. So I'm not really getting fantasies, just the basic controls for the non-subscriber version of Fantasia maybe. Just to toy around with a little bit in that particular extent. I guess that's part of the basic function that I can access at a very extreme. Maybe someone should describe the condition of being able to visually imagine stuff. It's way more common than being unable, so someone can describe it. It's the one that needs describing. That's where the stuff is. I think they can kind of cast visuals in front of them. Maybe without even closing their eyes. I don't know, someone make that video. We need more explanations of very common experiences I don't have. Explain social satisfaction, explain sexual attraction, enjoyment, comfort. There's other parts of life with which it might overlap. I don't know how psychedelic drugs would work. If you wanted me to report how psychedelic drugs would work, donate some psychedelic drugs to my Patreon drugs. I've always been amazed by people who can draw stuff, realistic stuff, or dynamic stuff, and I wonder if that's an element of this, or maybe I'm just being petulant about a skill I happen not to have because I can't accept being bad at something cool. So cool. I wonder if they're kind of filling in the lines they can already see. That said, I think I just don't appreciate visual art that much. I'm not into looking at people's bodies. Like, visual art, I feel like can't immerse in it, just appreciate its accuracy, what's there down to the pixel, rather than what it's inviting us to see. I think I'm just not that given to visual aesthetics. I'll have good clothes and occasionally good hair, but no interest in tattoos or having pictures up. I even leave my desktop background default, but maybe that means I'm a plain dullard, a dull plainard with nothing I value. And why not both? I think it makes me miss out on some kind of puzzle-related skills. Maybe if you're meant to memorize some visuals, but that's not loads of use in practical life. And I think I have a strong sequential memory, just not for the specificity of visuals. There's that memory palace technique to which I have no access. That sounds like you're just making it up, which you are. It's fantastical. The only visual memory I have is this Dreamcast accessory. I put a battery in for this bit. Someone left somewhere. I used to read fiction and just don't bother anymore. I'm not specifically interested in things that aren't real, except Pokemon. But I think I had some ideas of book characters and stories as visuals I could no longer access. And that defeats textual fiction for me. Well, that and chronic pain and internet ADHD, 4K high-definition ADHD, where there's infinite pointless non-fiction content within immediate access, and when you read non-fiction, you learn something. So visual stimuli I'm just not that much into, not films, then that could be a concentration span thing, or being uninterested in fiction about humans with their human desires. The excruciating normative narrative arc of a film, ugh. I'm also 0% interested in role-playing games, maybe because it involves the skill of imagination, or maybe it's the other ways they suck. I'm sure there's some people who are fantastic and enjoy role-playing games because they don't mind the other ways the role-playing games suck. I guess I don't have sexual fantasies, and most people do, but I'm not loads into sex. Not loads. Not loads. Stop saying not loads. It's not necessarily the same thing or unthing as Aphantasia, but it's worth a mention because that would involve fantastical visuals, right? I generally don't experience sexual attraction or have an interest in pornography except to object to the massive exploitation and misogyny of the industry. Fuck's sake. All these things I'm describing are negative statements just because it's a condition defined by absence. I can't describe anything unique to the experience that isn't a lack. Just state that we shouldn't assume things are universal just because they're common. If there are equivalents to visual fantasy across to the senses, I would say, unsurprisingly, that it's the audio one I have. I can get songs in my head, and it's not the same experience as hearing music for reals, but it's all there, all the layers and notes and textures in quite well-preserved detail. Even just voice quotes, maybe a classic Simpsons episode, I know the cadence of each line. I can use that in music creativity to know what goes well where, maybe to harmonize. So you could argue that I have heightened audio senses that make up for the lesser visuals, but don't argue that. I don't need to define everything as balancing out some equilibrium. I think that's not a helpful way to approach it, and my other senses suck anyway. I'm not much into sensing. Yeah, it feels unwise to argue that audio balances out visuals, as there are many advanced musicians with very strong visual senses, to a synesthetic extent, who equally emphasize visual arts. I feel the closest argument worth making is that I'm not a person of grace or subtleties or ether, that I like punchlines and equations, can only access the tangible, so that's the materialist perspective I can offer. It's worth wondering how visual imagination links to spirituality, souls, ghosts, religion, things born from humans' collective imaginations. I feel we would have made this stuff up either way, because, we wanted to explain things we didn't know, but there's probably some overlap with the ability to think you're seeing something. I used to try confronting my chronic pain, and tried joining a support group of much older women who would do some meditation-esque wellness thing. Picture a beach. And I didn't realize they were actually picturing a beach zone. I let them know that this wasn't working for me, and either way, I'm not much into beaches. I hate sand. They suggested I'd try some other natural environment that might comfort me. A forest, a field, but I can't construct any Sonic the Hedgehog zones. I think other such wellness, mindfulness, somethingnesses also don't apply to me. They're not always visual, but anything about stopping thinking. Can you stop thinking and being in touch with one's body? Being able to relax. It's all antipodean to who I am. Still, I don't feel a need to confront aphantasia. I'm not much invested in being alive anyway. But to me, its effects feel too occasional to class as a disability, just a quirk. It might be important to recognize it as a disability, or at least an ability. But for me, I guess it stops me from making up gross, scary things to see. Do you do that? It's a decent buffer against delusion. I'd rather call it an orientation. An adjective to vaguely describe something in me. Nearly absolute, but not absolutely absolute, because shit like this is changeable, situational. I've just not found the right psychedelic drug yet. It's fascinating to consider the diversity among our experiences. A lot of A conditions might be at more than 0%. I guess that falling asleep version, actual sleep dreams, is still Aphantasia, but we round it down to the A prefix because it's below 20%. That's an annoying use of the prefix that means without, but we have to acknowledge these complexities. It's better than calling it micro-Aphantasia, nano-Aphantasia, and let's not ignite wars between 0% Puritans and equally relevant lacquers who just don't have the gold star. I wouldn't actually say I have aphantasia because there's nothing there to have. I'd say I don't have Aphantasia. I think that's just a better way to describe this stuff. It doesn't cave into pathologization, it just accurately describes what's there. Or isn't. I hope this has helped you see. Do you see what I did there? Okay. See ya!